Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is February 26th, 2025, and have we got a fantastic interview for you today. We're continuing on with our 2 months of Lovefest, and today we have another fantastic author with a great love story to tell you. She has 2 books out that detail the life of Cleopatra, and these books are absolutely fabulous. They shed a new light on this incredible woman from history. Now, these are fiction, but they are based on her real life. And this not only tells a great love story, but one of the greatest of all time in history of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. So if you really love a great love story with a strong female character that is actually based on real events, today's episode is for you. So sit back and welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, Karen Essex. The way that I like to start these shows is to just have our guests tell everyone who you are and what you do.
All right. Well, I am and have been for a long time Karen Essex, and I am a national and internationally best-selling author of 6 books, 5 of them being historical novels. I write about powerful women in history. And in my work, I really try to focus on female accomplishments rather than female victimization. Mm-hmm. I'm also a passionate screenwriter and have been for many years. My background is working on the other side of the camera in Hollywood, and I've just continued that with my screenwriting career. I am very active in developing my own intellectual property, my books, into screenplays. So they've all been optioned, they've all been developed, and now we just wait for the studios and streamers to decide to make them.
Oh, wow. That's got to be the hardest part, waiting.
Horrible.
Because that's one thing I don't think a lot of people realize, that even though you may have sold the options, that doesn't mean it's ever going to get made.
No, and what people don't realize is that the studios and streamers and networks develop hundreds of things every year, and they make a handful. That's what people don't understand. So I always joke that people say, "Oh, what have I seen of yours on TV or film?" And I always say, I'm just one of these people that they pay a lot of money to write things and tell me they're wonderful, but they don't make them. So that's kind of my story so far.
Because what do you think the percentages of things that actually get made?
I would say it's less than 10%.
From what I hear from everybody, that's what I was assuming. But since I'm not actually in the industry and I haven't sold my rights for anything, I kind of wondered. But from the way everybody tells, like, oh yeah, I've sold these, but nothing's been made. It seems like it would be an actual small percentage of the rights that are purchased.
Very small, and it's also a very fickle business. You know, a friend of mine jokes that it's a new business every Monday morning, because every Monday morning you get the numbers on what people have seen over the weekend, and now we get the streamers' numbers. And so every Monday morning they say, oh my gosh, nobody went to see XYZ2. We can't make any more of these. I've had projects whisked away literally as we were packing our bags to go to another country to shoot.
Oh, wow.
I'm literally putting my sweaters in the bag and get the word that the network is going to pass on it. They've decided it's too expensive and their expensive projects aren't working right now.
I can't imagine the disappointment when something like that happens that close to having it done.
Oh, yeah, it's not pretty.
One of the things that I was really surprised about whenever I was reading your Wikipedia page was that you started out as a costume designer.
I did. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I started becoming fashion conscious. And would you believe my mom just didn't want to spend the amount of money on my clothes as I wanted? And so she let me take the bus to this lovely Swedish lady who taught me how to sew. And so from 11 years old on, I designed and made all my own clothes, prom dresses, date night dresses.
Hmm.
And I fell in love with the theater at some point, and I felt like my in was costume design. And so that's what I studied for my undergraduate. And yeah, that was my entree into the entertainment world.
How did you go from designing clothes to being a writer? I mean, you can't really imagine a smooth transition between those two because they're quite different.
Oh, they're different. I'll tell you the truth. One of the reasons that I was able to leave costume design behind is that I knew I was good and talented, but I knew I wasn't great. And I was actually personal friends with someone who was great. And I just always compared myself to her. And so it was kind of easy for me to let go of, to tell you the truth. Whereas writing, I tried to write my first novel when I was 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I think I'm more naturally a writer than a designer. I love both. I
Mhm.
still follow fashion, but if I had to say what my creative passion was, it's writing. And it's just something I can't stop doing.
So if you were already thinking about writing a book when you were 7, what made you go into writing for magazines? Why not go straight for trying a book?
Oh, well, then I have to tell you my whole story then. So, I went to Hollywood originally. I modeled for a couple of years. I modeled in the States and in Paris. And I knew that wasn't my passion either, but I wanted to travel and see the world. And so that's what I did. I had modeled in New Orleans as a college student, and then I went off into the world. But writing and just creating was always my passion. And so I came back to the States and I went to Los Angeles, and I was determined to get into the entertainment industry. And I did, working on the production side, and did very well actually on that side. But in that process, I read maybe 1,000 scripts, and about out of 1,000, maybe 50 were good. And it just occurred to me, I really, I know I can do better than this. And
Hmm.
so I decided that I would start writing. And strangely, I went to a party and I met a magazine editor, and we started talking. And he said, "Gosh, you know so much about music because I'm from New Orleans.
Hmm.
Would you write about music for me?" And I said, "Okay." And so that's really where I was writing scripts, but I also had to support myself and my child. And so journalism seemed to be the way to go at the time. And actually, it did. Journalism supported us the whole time. I went through 2 graduate programs. So I was just grateful to get work writing.
The book In Search of Betty Page, was that your first book?
Yes, that was my first book. This editor I just mentioned to you, I had learned who Betty Page was, and that there were all these people who were very devoted to her as an icon.
Hmm.
And at the time, nobody knew where she was. She had disappeared like 50 years before. And so I went to this editor who wanted me to work for him. And I said, "I'd like to write a story in search of the pinup icon, Betty Page." And he immediately said, "Oh, that's an amazing idea." So I spent the next 9 months of my life in search of Betty Page. And you didn't find her. I mean, I worked with a private detective. I interviewed people who knew her. I traveled all over the country looking for clues, couldn't find her. We did this big story on the cover of the LA Weekly, which was no longer existent, but it was this beautiful, big 4-color cover with Betty on the cover. And would you believe she was living in a senior community not far from where I was in Los Angeles? And somebody gave her this article and said,
Wow.
Betty, is this you? And she just gasped. She had no idea that she had this young following. And so then miraculously, her brother got a hold of me. And that's how we began. But it was really, it was quite the journey, quite the journey.
So did you get to go meet her?
Oh, I did. I did. No, it was thrilling.
I've always been fascinated with Betty Page, so that's amazing.
I met her, and it was so sad to me. And this is a big commentary on what society does to women because we met in a public place, and when I walked in, I saw this beautiful gray-haired older lady with pink lipstick and bangs and big blue eyes. And I mean, it was just, I just my heart stopped. And she was still so cute, but
Hmm.
she was so ashamed of having grown old.
Mm.
I mean, how horrible is that? And I said, Betty, you are beautiful. She said, oh, no, no one wants to see a 75-year-old Betty Page. I found that terribly sad.
Yeah, that is heartbreaking.
Yeah, it was. And we could never really convince her to come out. I mean, some great things came out of the book. You know, she became friends with Hugh Hefner again. And I must say, because she had been a 1955 pinup model for
Hmm.
Playboy, and he was extremely generous to her. He would have his limousine pick her up and bring her to the Playboy mansion. They would watch old movies together all night long and talk about the old days. So, you know, I know he wasn't a perfect person, but gosh, I can't complain about the way he treated Betty.
That's nice. Yeah, I think she got a lot of unwarranted treatment in her life.
Oh gosh, yes. So much, so much. And I was the first person she told me that she had confessed it all to. And she said, I haven't said a word about any of this for 60 years, and I'm going to tell you.
Wow.
It was quite heavy.
I'm kind of wondering how you go from writing about music to picking up a story about Betty Page.
It's all pop culture.
Well,
Uh,
true.
you know, I always joke, I go high and I go low. So, I mean, I love opera and, you know, serious theater and all that stuff,
Mhm.
but I also love rock and roll. And I've even been a heavy metal fan at a different point in my life, you know,
Mhm.
so I'll read Marcel Proust or I'll read a comic book.
Yeah.
That's just how I am.
So now you have the first book out, Betty Page, Life of a Pinup Legend. What is your next move?
I was deciding to go back to graduate school. I love learning. I love school. And so
Hmm.
I knew I wanted to do something female focused. And so I started reading women's history. And I learned that the real Cleopatra had nothing to do with the Cleopatra in the popular imagination.
Hmm.
And so I was talking to a writer friend at the time, and I said, do you know this would make a really good book? And he looked at me and said, I know a writer, you know. And so that became my passion project, and it still is, Diane. I mean, that was in the 90s that I got that idea. And I immediately started researching Cleopatra. I actually entered a graduate program at Vanderbilt University so I could study with the right classical studies scholars. And I devoted years of my life to doing the research, sort of like just like I went in search of the real Betty Page, I
Hmm.
went in search of the real Cleopatra. And I put every bit of my financial resources behind it. I went to Egypt, Rome, Greece, Turkey, just trying to walk in Cleopatra's footsteps. So I spent 7 years writing the book, and during that time, got a literary agent, and she sold the first book overnight, which was a
Wow.
really big reward for me after spending every ounce of free time and money I had
Yeah.
trying to do this.
We know, and I think it's interesting the kind of juxtaposition between Betty Page and Cleopatra because both of them are women who stepped outside of the norms of what was expected of women, and they were kind of demonized for it. But I know with like Cleopatra, she was an incredibly well-educated statesperson, even among men at that time.
Oh, absolutely. She had the respect of her people. She had the respect of other world leaders. A famous historian once said that the Romans only deigned to fear two people. One was Hannibal, and the other one was a woman. And Cleopatra, people don't realize it, was possibly the richest person in the world
Mm.
at the height of her power. And she was queen of this geographically just this well-placed nation. And she used that money and that power to her advantage. And I often think about writing a book about a sort of dystopian book about how the world would be if Cleopatra and Antony had won their war with Rome.
That would be
Because
interesting.
they were out for world domination and they came close. They really came close.
The one thing that I just remember, so many things in Hollywood that have been made about Cleopatra. She's always depicted as just a pretty face who uses her sex appeal to get what she wants. She's very rarely portrayed as a woman who is well educated, knows how to be a statesperson, to actually work and succeed on the international stage with other leaders. I mean, she
Well,
she spoke like
exactly.
what, 9 languages and could read hieroglyphics?
Yes. She was also the first of her lineage. Her ancestor, Ptolemy, was granted, or rather took, Egypt for his prize after Alexander the Great died. And the Ptolemies ruled Egypt for 250 years. Cleopatra was the last Ptolemy. And she was the first Ptolemy to speak Egyptian, which made her a favorite of her people.
Hmm.
Before her, they were these Greek usurpers who just recreated Greek culture in Egypt and spoke Greek
Hmm.
and imposed a lot of Greek culture and Greek ideals on the Egyptians, which wasn't all that bad. But also, can you imagine, like, if the United States, we agreed that we all spoke French at the time of the Revolutionary War, and then suddenly somebody comes along and speaks English? I mean,
Yeah.
it was just like shocking to the people of Egypt, and they loved her for it.
This is probably a really good time for you to tell us about your books, Cleopatra, the Early Years, and Book Two, Pharaoh, Book Two of Cleopatra. Why don't you
Yes.
tell us about these?
Well, because I really wanted to tell her whole story, in my research, I discovered that we start the Cleopatra story, not me, but, in the culture, we start it at the moment she meets Julius Caesar, as if
Mhm.
that's when she sprang to life.
Yeah.
And she had this amazing, scary, really like her whole childhood and adolescence were filled with death defying moments. Most of the members of her family wanted to kill her rather than allow her to inherit the throne. She was her father's favorite, which made her dangerous to all the rest. She survived riots in the streets of Alexandria. She survived assassination attempts, coup attempts, and all of this before her 20th birthday. So I thought, this is as fascinating a story as the rest of the story.
Hmm.
So that's why I decided to write one book alone about young Cleopatra. And it begins when she's very young and it ends right before she meets Julius Caesar. And so that is, to this day, that is still the untold story of Cleopatra's youth. I keep looking for somebody else who's written it, and nobody has. So that was book one. And then obviously, when my agent sold it, the editor said, well, we obviously want you to finish the story. And so that was always my plan, to write then to start the book two with her meeting Caesar. And then Caesar dies and she takes up with Caesar's second in command, Mark Antony, and the two of them become the ultimate power couple. It was a partnership of love and ambition. So that's book two. And in book two, I wanted to show what a master diplomat and stateswoman and strategizer she was. It was those two books were a sort of 10-year effort on my part. And then they started being optioned for movies and TV right after that. And I have developed them with several different companies. And frankly, my research has continued. So as new information comes out about the Cleopatra world,
Mhm.
I incorporated into what I'm doing for film and TV. So it's been a 30-year endeavor, honestly. It's been my whole adult life, really, my whole professional life. My dedication in the second book is to my daughter, Olivia, who's had to share her life with the Queen of Egypt. I think you can tell by my voice that it's still, to this day, I'm not sick of it. It's still a major passion project.
Yeah, you can definitely tell that you're excited about the subject. I was curious why you spelled Cleopatra with a K.
Because she was Greek, and that would be the original Greek spelling.
There's so many things that you see whenever you research it, it's always with a C. And when I wanted to be sure to point that out while we're talking, so whenever people go to look to find your books, that they use a K to spell Cleopatra to find it more easily.
Yes, thank you so much for pointing out. It really was an oversight on my part. I wish I had been as intelligent as my good friend Michelle Moran, who's also she's a fantastic historical novelist. And she wrote a book about Cleopatra's daughter, and she was smart enough to spell it with a C on the title page, but then she quickly explains that they were Greek and spells it with a K in the text of the book. And so I thought I was being so clever, and my publisher did too, but I think we kind of made the book a little bit harder to find by doing that. But it was really just out of the desire to just bring the most authentic Cleopatra I could find to the reading public.
There was another thing about the covers that kind of struck me too. On both of the covers, you have the face, but then you have flowers over one eye. Is there any significance to those flowers?
They are the lotus flower from Egypt, and so that's the significance. I have to credit the book designer, Maya Roman, who is just a brilliant artist, and she came up with that idea, and I thought it was quite beautiful.
I was wondering if there was like a specific message behind the kind of flower.
Well, the lotus flower is particular to Egypt, but also, my books work very hard to bring out the businesswoman, the diplomat, the power ruler of Cleopatra. But I also felt that the flower was also an emblem of her femininity, which I didn't want to desexualize her either.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the thinking behind the design.
Do you think that there are starting to be more works coming out portraying her closer to how she really was? Or does her history still have a little bit of work before she's really shown the way that she should be shown in most things?
Oh, I think, yeah, both are true. I mean, I haven't seen a fictional version of Cleopatra yet that quite does what I did,
Hmm.
but I notice academic writing, they're much more aware of the fact that she was a woman of power and not just some sex symbol. So the academic work is being done. What I wanted to do was bring the academic work to the public imagination. I feel like if I finally get the TV series made, that then my work will be complete because I hate to say this, books still have impact with individual readers and with groups, but I don't think that novels have the kind of massive cultural impact they've had in the past because we have too much else going
Yeah.
on. We have the internet, we have TV, we have streamers, we have movies, we have games, we just have too much vying for our attention.
Too many options and less time.
Yes. Yes.
Now, whenever I'm going through looking at your selection of books that you have, it seems like one is a little bit of the odd duck out because you have like stealing Athena and Da Vinci and the princess, but you also have Dracula in love. That seems like it is very different from the other things that you have done.
Well, it is, but in a way, it's the same thing. Born and raised in New Orleans, grew up on Anne Rice. And, I was this little kid who was riding my bike home from third grade to watch reruns of Dark Shadows.
Oh, yeah.
So I've always been fascinated with vampires, and but I never had any intention of writing about vampires. And then one day I started reading Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the character of Mina Harker just annoyed me because she was just this kind of mealy-mouthed good girl. And I just thought, being an historian and knowing everything I know about late 19th century Victorian culture, I know that that was a time of tremendous upheaval for women. So that's when women are marching in the streets trying to get the vote and tossing away their corsets and demanding their rights. And also working, industrialization made it possible for women to go work in factories. So I thought, I just don't believe this little silly Mina girl that Bram Stoker created. And so my intention was to do what I sort of have done in all my other books, which is to say, you know what, if this Mina Harker were a real person, here's how she would be in this culture. She wouldn't just be this little obedient mouthpiece for the good guys. She would have thoughts of her own. And so that it was just kind of being annoyed at Bram Stoker, who I, by the way, revere as well. But it was just being annoyed with Bram Stoker that made me write that book.
The character definitely seems to fall in line with your other strong female characters.
Yes, my Mina has a very interesting history of her own. I wanted to call the book The Secret History of Mina Harker, but my publisher thought it wasn't sexy enough. So
And that's one thing. How do you deal with it whenever like you pour yourself into a book, you turn it into the publisher, and they do things like that where you have a name that you would like to title it, they say, nope, we're going to publish it under this. How do you deal with that?
not easily. I mean, in retrospect, that's one I wish I had fought harder for, because I think that Dracula fans all know who Mina Harker is. And I think that's a more appropriate name for what is actually in the book. But on the other hand, the person who said this was the head of Doubleday. He knows his business. He's a brilliant guy. And so I fought, but I didn't fight too hard because, I know how to write, but they know how to sell.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the genesis of that title.
Going back to Pharaoh, book 2 of Cleopatra, did you want to read a little bit of your book?
Well, I would love to, because, I know that I'm part of Lovefest, which I'm so excited about, because I think that the love affair between Antony and Cleopatra is probably the greatest love story, and not written, but the greatest love story that ever existed, because these are two people who were more than willing to die for each other. And I know a lot of couples, I don't know that many who would argue about, well, I want to die for you. No, I want to die for you. So this little section of the book it follows the argument that they had, where she is determined that she is going to die so he can live, and he is determined that he is going to die so she can live. And they've made their decision. I'll let the reader find out what they decided. But this is the section. So they made this decision and they begin to make love. And this is what is going on in her mind. She is thinking, this is desire's last stand. If she lives to be an old crone, she will never again open this way to a man. If she is forced to give herself to someone else, it will be a hollow act. The love that comes from deep inside her belongs to him alone. She wraps her legs tighter around her husband, trying to send all her desire into his body so that his spirit may take it with him on his journey to the gods. She wants him to have all of it, every last vestige of pleasure her womanhood has to offer must become an indelible part of his soul now. She tries to will all her sensuality, all of her sex, to leave her muscles, her skin, her nose and mouth and arms and hands. She pushes everything she has into him, imagining her soul seep deep under his skin and into his blood. She sees it now coursing through his veins, filling him up. It will strengthen his spirit and help him to die with a feeling of power and not defeat, with hope and not despair.
Wow. I
I
had
can't
it.
believe I wrote that.
It took a moment before my brain kicked back in after listening to you. You can't imagine somebody actually feeling that enamored and willing to give up everything for somebody else.
Yeah, I've never felt it myself. And Pharaoh was a completely different writing experience for me because, it took years and years and years to write Cleopatra. And when I began Pharaoh, I went into a kind of weird trance and I felt like I was possessed by something while I was writing it. And when I finished it, I thought, I mean, I don't even know where I was when I was writing this. This can't possibly be good. And so I sent it to my agent, just expecting her to call me and say, because she was a very direct person. I just expected her to call me and say, we have to start over. And she called me and said, I couldn't put this down. This was amazing. And so I don't know. I have to credit some higher power with writing this book. And you hear writers talk about that, just this
Mhm.
kind of being swept away into this thing. And so I don't know. Some spirit wrote this book, and I thank them very much.
So now, even though you had that kind of flow of words coming from you, whenever you're setting up and you're like, okay, I have a book idea, this is what I'm going to write about, how do you go about putting it all together and getting started? Are you a serious plotter? Do you kind of do a half plot, half pants? I mean, what is your process?
Oh, well, I'm pretty crazy. So I dive into the research like a maniac, and then I sort of outline all my research. And then from that, I usually do about 100-page outline of the book. I've done that on every book
Wow.
because I feel like I don't want to write myself into a corner,
Hmm.
and I don't want to promise a publisher something that I can't ultimately deliver. And so, I mean, my process is very painstaking, and there are people who will tell you that if they had to do that, it would kill their creative spirit. So, I mean, I say I wrote Pharaoh in this kind of trance, and I did, but I had already done all of that laborious sort of work of what it was going to be. So I had already absorbed that into my psyche.
That outline is almost the size of a novella.
Oh, it is. A very, very exciting thing has just happened to me, which is that my undergrad university, the Tulane Library, has offered to archive my papers. And so they are creating a Karen Essex archive, which I'm so honored and thrilled about. So I've had to go through, I've opened like big tubs of my research. And so I can tell you it's not an exaggeration to say that all my outlines, you could use them for doorstops.
Wow. That is so cool, though, that they're going to be archiving them. That's
Oh,
amazing.
it's really amazing. It's not really something I kind of expected in my lifetime, but
Hmm.
it's exciting, and it'll be an ongoing project with them. So yeah, I'm thrilled about it. I'm just so honored and thrilled.
That is amazing. Whenever you found out they were going to do that, did you do anything to celebrate?
I'm going to give a party after we sign the papers and it becomes formal. I'm going to give a big cocktail party to celebrate it because it is a very big deal.
Yeah, that definitely deserves celebration.
I think so.
So now seems like a good time to do our 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but I'm just really nosy, so I continue to do it. Are you ready?
I guess so.
Question 1. When you were in school, what was your best subject?
English.
That seems to fit. What
Yeah.
was your worst?
I don't want to sound egotistical, but I didn't have any bad subjects, frankly. I really didn't. I was good at math and science, but not great.
Hmm.
I didn't really have any bad subjects.
That's good. Let's see. Question 2. What is one food that you hated as a child that you love now?
Oh gosh. I grew up in New Orleans. We eat everything. We love everything. I would say anchovies. Yes, I thought anchovies made me sick, and now I love anchovy paste in Caesar salads.
My husband introduced me to fried anchovies. They
Ooh,
were
how's that?
so good.
I'll have to try that.
I was determined I didn't want to even try anchovies because I'd had anchovies on pizza when I was like in high school. I was like,
Same.
no, I don't want to do it. And he's like, just try one and I'll leave you alone. And oh my God, I think I ate like 5 in 5 minutes. They
What
were
do you
so
what does
good.
he what do you fry them in?
We got him at a restaurant here in Germany. It's a popular appetizer.
Okay.
And it seems like it's just maybe like a regular flour or cornmeal,
Oh,
but it is so good.
I'm gonna try it.
Then question 3. Since you are an author and a screenwriter, which do you typically find that you prefer, the movie or the book?
Oh gosh. In almost every case, I prefer the book, but I think there are like certain books I think have made better movies. Oh, things like The Notebook, I think was a fantastic movie. And, I mean, I don't like sentimental books, but when I see a sentimental movie, I cry like everybody else. So I think the worst movies are made from serious literature, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I'm about to test that theory because probably my number one book, besides the works of Marcel Proust, probably my number one book is 100 Years of Solitude.
Hmm.
And I'm just getting ready to dig into that Netflix series. So we'll see.
Question 4. If you were not a writer, what do you think you would be doing?
I really wish I had a bunch of parallel lives. When I was a kid, I also wanted to be a psychiatrist. And I think I would have been a really good one because I'm a very good listener and I can deconstruct personalities pretty
Hmm.
well, which comes in really handy when you're writing novels.
Hmm.
So I would love to have been a psychiatrist. Another career I really wish I hadn't abandoned is being a film executive because I was very good at that. And, I was very good at finding good material and working with writers and also good in meetings. I
Hmm.
was never shy about just walking into a studio head's office and saying, this is what I want to do. So I kind of feel like I missed out on that career. But you can't do both,
So, question 5, and this is one that I've been asking a lot of the authors. Whenever you want to just sit down on the weekend and relax and enjoy a book, who is an author you're more likely to go to?
My favorite author who always entertains and inspires me is the late Iris Murdoch. I read Iris Murdoch for pleasure and I read her for craft. I read her for philosophy. One of the heartbreaks of my life is that I had finally gained sort of enough journalism cred
Mm.
to approach Iris Murdoch about interviewing her. And I was in touch with her representatives, and I got this very sad note from them saying that she had passed away. And then I learned that she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and
Oh.
she died very quickly thereafter. It crushed me that I didn't get to meet her. I just think she was the finest writer in the English language of the 20th century for my taste.
So if somebody was just going to read one, which one of her books would you suggest?
I think the Sea. That's the book that she won the Booker Prize for. And I think it's one of the most accessible to a reader who's not particularly interested in philosophy or some of the other deeper subjects she goes into. I have a very dear friends. They're a married couple, and they are both writers and massively successful and great readers. And so I recommended the Sea to both of them. And the husband fell in love with it and says it's one of his favorite books ever now. And the wife hated it. So
Oh, wow.
there you go.
That's wild that they both had such extreme experiences with the same book.
I know. The first time I read 100 Years of Solitude, I thought, oh my gosh, why does anyone go on and on about this book? And then I put it away. And then about 5 years later, I picked it up again and I was enthralled with it. So I think we bring our own moods to books all the time.
Yeah, very true. So now let's remind everybody again who you are and where they can find your work.
I am Karen Essex. You can find me at www.karenessex.com. I should mention that I've also started to do a little bit of manuscript editing. It was something I didn't know that I would like doing this for other people, but helping people develop their books and also just coaching them to try to give them confidence has been something that's been enormously invigorating for me. I really love doing it. It's very satisfying. So you can find me on my website if you just want to learn more about me, or I would encourage everybody to please sign up for my newsletter, which you can do on my website. I've also just started a Substack page, and I intend to do a lot of fun things with that. I didn't even know you could make money on Substack. And
Mhm.
so I created a page and suddenly people started subscribing. So I intend to do some really fun things with Substack subscribers. Like, well, maybe for paid subscribers, I'll do a once a month Ask Me Anything, and we'll do a Zoom and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. So those are the ways that you can find me. I'm so findable on Facebook and Instagram. If you can't find me, you can't find anybody.
And we are going to have all of your information and links to all of your social media in the description of today's podcast and at burkhartbooks.com on our podcast page.
Lovely. And before we conclude, can I just thank you for supporting writers? We are just at this point where our publishers are demanding that we do more and more and more work ourselves, and we are scrambling to get our voices out there. And podcasts like this are invaluable for getting the word out. So thank you so much, Dianne. I know this is a labor of love, and I know it's very time consuming. And I think I can speak for all writers to say we really appreciate it.
Well, one of the reasons why I originally started this was I was a self-published author and I was trying to find a way to get my books out there. And my first season, most of the time, I was just reading from my own books. I was talking about my books, what was going to be coming up. And even I started to get bored with that after about 2 months. Even though it was just once a week, still, I was tired of talking about my own stuff. So then I started contacting some of my friends who are also authors. I was like, hey, come talk to me about your books for an episode so we can talk about something different. And after a while, other authors started sending me messages like, hey, can I come on and talk to you about my books? And it just kind of snowballed from there. And it has been so much fun because I love to read. I love books. I love talking. So it all works together. So
Well, I'm so glad you do. And don't you love it that it just developed organically like that?
yeah, and it's amazing how it took off in like the first 2 years after I started bringing on other authors. It just went crazy. And I started getting on the radar of publicists. and then big name publishing houses. And I have no idea how any of them found me. But now I'm hooked up with all of these great sources that I don't really have to look for anybody anymore. I just get lists of authors that these people represent, and I say, okay, I want to talk to this person, this person, this person, and they sign them up.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
I can't imagine any publisher not cooperating with you because you're filling such a need.
Well, and it's been so fun. My to be read list is gigantic now. I will never be able to finish this before I die because almost everybody that I talk to, like you, like not only is the books that we were mainly looking at with Cleopatra, the Early Years and Pharaoh, book 2 of Cleopatra, not just those 2 books, but you have 9 books that you have out. There's other ones in there like the Dracula in Love and Stealing Athena and Leonardo Swans. It's like, geez, okay. I've got a lot of reading to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't thank you enough. This has been absolutely fabulous. And as someone whose husband is a major history buff, and I have seen so many documentaries on Cleopatra and her involvement in politics, I love the idea of these books. That was why, as soon as you sent me the information about them, I'm like, yes, I want to talk about these.
Oh, I'm so glad. I always tell men who ask me about my book, and they go, is it only for women? I said, no, the books are full of sex and politics, the 2 things men love.
That is true. That's very fitting. Thank you again. This has been absolutely fabulous.
You are welcome. Thank you.
So there you have it, my interview with the incredible Karen Essex. I am always so impressed with all of the authors that I get to meet on this podcast because so many of them have such interesting histories, and the way that they all come to be an author is so varied. It's just amazing. Everybody brings such interesting and unique perspectives from their lives to all of their work, and it just makes such a rich pool to draw from. I never get bored doing this podcast because everybody is so unique and so fascinating. I absolutely love getting to talk to all of these authors, and I hope that you enjoy getting to hear these conversations. Now, next week, we have a new Penguin Young Readers up-and-coming author, Stephanie Valentine, and we're going to be talking about her book, First Love Language. Now, Stephanie is a Taiwanese adoptee, and she brings her own personal experience into her young adult debut novel that we're going to be discussing with her next week. And I have already started the next round of interviews for our April and May episodes. And I have just been absolutely inundated with applications to be on this podcast. I probably have enough sitting in my file folder right now that I could book out the next 4 seasons in a few days. It's just absolutely amazing the response that we've been getting. The downloads have been doubling almost every few weeks. And it's just been absolutely fascinating. And I owe it all to you listeners who are sharing these podcasts, who are talking about them, who are posting about them, and who keep coming back for more. I couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much. And you're going to love the people that I have lined up for this season. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm sure all of you will enjoy it just as much. Or at least I hope so. Now, I have decided I am definitely going to go ahead and do 1 issue of Book Banter magazine every year. I can do it a little bit during the whole year, so I'm not doing a lot of work all at once like I had been doing last year with every single issue. But I am going to do a year-end book buying guide that will cover every single author that we have talked to during the season. And that way we still have something to offer people who don't listen to podcasts, who don't enjoy podcasts. They can still find out all of the information about all of the authors that we talk to on Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, the Book Talk podcast. And it's just fun to do. I really love doing magazines. So yeah, I'm finding a way to do everything. At least I hope I can keep doing everything because this is just too much fun to stop doing any of it. But I need to get busy because tomorrow is my husband's 60th birthday, and I have got a lot of stuff planned. I've got cakes to bake, I've got decorations to make, I've got gifts to wrap. There's a lot going on tomorrow, so I better get going. So now you know what time it is, folks. It's time for you all to go forth, find a really good book to enjoy this week, and be happy.